Welcome to the Futurebuild Podcast, your trusted source for exploring the ideas, people and solutions shaping a better built environment. I'm Martin Hearn, Event Director of Futurebuild, and today we're tackling an issue that's become critical for our sector's credibility and progress: how we talk about sustainability and why stamping out greenwash is no longer optional. I'll be joined by Charlie Martin, CEO and founder of the Anti-Greenwash Charter, a driving force behind raising standards and supporting organisations to move beyond fear, silence and so-called greenhushing. Charlie has dedicated his career to helping companies communicate their sustainability journey with integrity, and has just released the first annual Green Claims Pulse Survey in partnership with ourselves, Futurebuild, the Carbon Literacy Project and Hattrick. In this episode, we'll hear about Charlie's background, why he's made it his mission to champion credible, evidence-based sustainability claims. We'll unpack the key findings of the new report, including why 86% of built environment professionals want standardised life cycle assessments for products, how trust is being eroded by unclear claims, and what steps organisations can take to build real confidence in their messaging. So if you want to understand why it's now is the time to lead with honesty and how to turn transparency into your competitive advantage, stay tuned. Charlie, an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Martin, it is a great pleasure to be recording with you. I know that you and I have done various things like this together, but to actually get to sit down and record a podcast with you is something I've been looking forward to. So thank you for having me on.
No problem, brilliant. We'd love to start off by finding out a little bit more about yourself, your journey, especially within the built environment, sustainability, and maybe for those people that don't know, what got you into sort of your passion around greenwashing.
Love it. Everyone loves talking about themselves, so let me dive into that. Charlie Martin. My background is I'm a marketing and comms guy by trade. I used to run an agency called Gusto. It was a marketing and digital agency that typically worked with clients in the built environment sector. So I ran that for about 10 years. We worked with product manufacturers. We worked with natural building suppliers, some trade associations. So that was kind of the first 10 years of my career. And I think most marketing and sales and comms people probably get to a stage in their career where they've probably sold a few widgets, or in my case, insulation, and they think to themselves, what's this all sort of for? Like, what's the impact that I'm having? And it just happened to be that at that time, this was about 2021, we had the CMA's Green Claims Code published, the Competition Markets Authority's Green Claims Code. And we had two really proactive clients at the time at our agency who came to us and said, guys, we've got a new brief for you as our agency partner, as our comms partner. We know that we are being responsible when it comes to our marketing and communications, but we want you guys to come up with some sort of campaign that we can run in order to reassure all of our stakeholders, both internally and externally, crucially, that we are practicing our marketing and comms in a responsible way. And I just thought that's a fascinating brief. I was like, we're 2021, so we're in that kind of, COVID-y kind of fake news, corporate misinformation, political misinformation, disinformation everywhere. I just thought, like, there's a calling to this. This is really interesting. One of the clients, I should say, was going through B Corp certification at the time, which obviously made it really relevant to them. They viewed what this could be as potentially a point scoring activity. But anyway, we sat down with the brief and we were like, what could they do? And what we came up with was this idea of them producing what we called a green claims policy. So it wasn't particularly revolutionary thinking, but we thought, wouldn't it be incredibly impactful potentially to produce a green claims policy that detailed exactly how you as organizations manage and govern your marketing and comms function, i.e. lifting the lid on, how you do it, basically.
Yeah.
And we pitched this to these two clients. The B Corp guys were like, brilliant, point scoring, let's crack on, it's perfectly aligned. I always remember the conversation with the marketing director of the other client at the time, who he was brilliant. He said to me, Charlie, you know that you've helped us put together our brand values, which some of them are open, honest and transparent, amongst others. But he said, this is very open, honest and transparent. And I said that's essentially the point here. And we got them over the line. They both saw the value in it, and we produced these green claims policies with these two clients. then immediately did a piece of stakeholder research off the back of it. And what we found, which was fascinating, I mentioned internal and external stakeholders was the brief. The feedback across the board, from employees to customers to board to investors, it was all unanimous. This is an incredibly healthy and proactive thing that we've done, because what we've done essentially is got on the front foot. Yeah. We've said, look, there's major concern and scrutiny and distrust when it comes to all forms of corporate communication. By producing a green claims policy and getting on the front foot, we've disarmed a lot of the potential flack that might be thrown at us for, any issues that we have in the future in terms of the way that we communicate. And that was the moment when I thought to myself, there's real power in a green claims policy, in proactive disclosure around how you communicate your environmental credentials. And that was the starting point for the Anti-Greenwash Charter.
Brilliant. Well, you mentioned it now, and it would be great to sort of talk about what is the Charter, how did that come about, what does it involve? I know we're going to go into that in a lot more detail later on, but give people just an overview of what that is.
Sure. Well, essentially taking that brief that we had from those two clients, we thought, well, okay, a green claims policy is a great start, but these organizations want to be recognized for responsible comms and marketing practice. Is there something more we can do than just simply encourage them to create a green claims policy? Because, of course, you could throw the argument back at a green claims policy that, it could be seen as a greenwashing tactic in of itself, producing a green claims policy, because, it's like, well, great, you've created the document, but how do I know that that's been verified? Yeah. How do I know that that's been checked and underpinned with proper governance? So we then came up with, right, let's go back to the drawing board. If we were going to prove that an organization was showing real concern and responsibility and due diligence to the way that they communicated, what would they do? And what we came up with was essentially a 3-stage process. The first step would be to train their teams. So we're going to come on to talk about some of the research that Futurebuild and the Charter have been doing together, but essentially that's the starting point. And what we refer to it as is greenwash awareness training. So we deliver that at the C-suite, at the sales, marketing and comms team level. So what we want to do is get everybody aware of what the issues are and understand how their behavior in their role can influence or can deliver greenwashing or misinformation. So essentially that's the first step. The second thing that we do is what we call static content reviews. So what we do is we take your website materials, your brochure materials, anything that's fairly evergreen and stays fairly static, and essentially review that against relevant regulation and best practice to make sure that you haven't made any mistakes essentially in the content that you've produced. The final thing that we do is then help the organization produce a green claims policy, very much akin to the policies that I've just mentioned to you then. And what that does from our perspective is creates a situation in which the organization has trained their staff, they've checked all their static content to make sure it's aligned, and they now have a policy to govern any content they produce ongoing to make sure that it's aligned with best practice and anti-greenwashing principles. That to us looks like best practice. I don't think many can argue that if you've committed to that, you've taken this seriously. What we then do as the Charter is we then commission what we call campaign reviews to be conducted during a 12-month license period, initial 12-month license period, where essentially the implementation of a signatory's green claims policy is checked. And we make sure that they're doing what they said they were doing in the policy for the campaigns they're producing. And that is, perhaps giving you loads of detail, but that's essentially what the Anti-Greenwash Charter does on a day-to-day basis.
So give us an idea of the scale of the Anti-Greenwash Charter at the moment, sort of how many people have signed up to this, the range of industries, because I know it's not just manufacturers as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are at just shy of 20 certified signatories at the moment. So that's organizations that have been through that full scope, if you like, of onboarding. The agency, Gusto, very much focused in the built environment sector. So the initial traction that we've had with the Charter has very much been in the built environment sector. And what I think we've been really encouraged by is the breadth of organisation in the sector that have signed up. So, we've got everything from Morgan Sindall Construction to Carndine Design and Flooring, Gazebo Entrance Control. We've got a number of engineering firms, Whitby Wood, for example. We've got natural paint producers. We've got Timber Development UK, industry bodies. It really has touched upon sort of all aspects, if you like, of the industry. That's exciting for us because we think, well, any organisation that wants to take their sustainability communication seriously should seriously consider, if not working with us, they should consider producing a green claims policy, training their teams and checking their contents in line with regulation.
And I think from my perspective, it makes absolute sense that in the built environment we have something like this because, sustainability is embedded now in what we're doing, but also that we've seen some appalling communications, over the year. And I think, before we come on to the survey that we've just done, we did the survey 2 or 3 years ago. We saw the impact that if you get it wrong in terms of the trust or even the despec that you can have through going that. Love to just touch on maybe some of the sort of key learning points or pitfalls that you've seen or red flags, people that have done it wrong, and how you've helped them sort of change that.
Well, that's a really good question, and that actually sort of perfectly lines up. Great question. But lines up the most recent example. I can't name the name because we're currently onboarding them, but an organisation that has previously had a problem with the ASA. And what the ASA upheld in terms of the case with them was that essentially there was some just fundamental human error by a junior member of staff who just essentially completely misinterpreted some of the data that they were provided with in order to produce the campaign that ultimately was published. And this particular organisation just went hands up, like we just got that, we just got it wrong. We're not trying to contest it. We've just made a mistake. And I think if you look at greenwashing or misinformation more generally, I think the intentional greenwashing, if you like, really only manifests itself in omission-based greenwashing. So that's I'm getting technical with terms here, but essentially when an organization, the only real intentional perform I think that there is when you're presenting your sustainability credentials in one particular area over here, but completely failing to consider the context within which you're making those claims. So, you're saying that your product X is absolutely fantastic and it's above board and it's got an EPD and it's got all this sort of stuff, but you're absolutely failing to disclose the fact that you're doing a completely nefarious, unsustainable practice over here in terms of the way you're managing your supply chain or whatever else it might be. So that's for me where the intentional element comes in. When the non-intentional greenwashing occurs, it really comes down to poor governance, poor process, and perhaps a lack of understanding within the organization, which we're going to come on to. I think those are the red flags to look out for, or the way I view organizations now is if a mistake has just clearly been made in terms of use of language, in terms of the fact that a claim hasn't been properly substantiated, that's one thing. And we should view the organization as having made a mistake and needing to be supported. The omission-based greenwashing, I think, is the far more damaging and almost far more sort of evil, dare I say, form of misinformation. So I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No, it does. And I think, an interesting, we had an event that we would just run together, and you assembled an amazing panel. And I think one of the interesting things that came out from that for me was there are now heads of sustainabilities. It's a new role, but it's pretty much embedded now in every single organisation. And it's about how they're working, or maybe how they don't work with the marketing function as well. It'd be great to get your opinion on that.
It's a great question. And that, I have to admit, when we started the charter, this was something that I wasn't totally aware of myself. I didn't really understand the dynamics at play, and it's been probably the biggest learning area for us as a team to understand so much about the intricacy in the relationship between ESG, sustainability, and marketing and comms. We had Tina Tina Hewen from Gazebo Entrance Control on the show last night. She's got a fairly unique role because it's a combination of both the marketing and the sustainability roles within a single function. So I think what's fascinating is that there's a bottleneck basically that we see a lot of in the organizations we work with, whereby you have a smaller sustainability or ESG department, a much larger marketing, comms, or creative brand, if you like, team. And what happens is that there's queries going back up to the sustainability industry. Can we say this? Can we say that? Can you check this? Can you check that? They then typically are in panic mode, where what they either do is they either spit it out to legal and compliance and go, guys, you need to look after it, which once legal and compliance get hold of creative content, often gets wrapped up in a different way, if you like, or delivered in a different way, which can ultimately take some of the impact, if you like, of the creative out of it. So, or the sustainability teams just turn around and go, we haven't got time for it. We haven't got the resource to be able to manage it. And coming back to what we're going to talk about today in terms of greenhushing, I actually think that's one of the things that hasn't borne out of this, is that the pressure that the sustainability and ESG teams are under through all the reporting that's required and the fact that they're typically under-resourced means that when they're getting queries about comms, I think it's just seen as look, just don't bother.
Yeah.
Which is a major issue.
Absolutely. And we're going to come on to that. And that's a really nice segue actually into, the partnership that we've just formed actually, which is us. So Futurebuild alongside the Anti-Greenwash Charter with the Carbon Literacy Project and Hattrick are now partnering to do an annual Green Claims Pulse survey. And we've just published the first results of the first one. We surveyed 240, I think, professionals from the built environment, over 3,000 consumers. And there's some really impactful or in some cases shocking results from this as well. So I'd love to delve straight into that. Maybe what surprised you most?
That's a good question. Do you know what? I actually, when I read the report, I don't know if it's just because I'm spending far too much time thinking about greenwashing and reading about it, but there was nothing that struck me as particularly surprising in it, to be honest. There was nothing where actually, perhaps, just coming back to our last point, I think there was a stat in there, I might have got this wrong, feel free to correct me on this, but I think it was suggesting that only like 5% of marketeers ultimately have the final say in terms of the sustainability communications that go out. And that, to me, that struck me as a particularly interesting statistic, because I would hope to see a sort of, if we're here in 12 months' time, I think one of the best things that we can hope for is to build an industry full of marketeers who are now so sort of deeply knowledgeable in sustainability and in due process when it comes to sustainability communications, that they are the ones that ultimately are in charge of that final decision made about what goes out. Because, and this would be my argument with this, we all talk about the need for, we need to find ways of being able to engage with people on these topics around sustainability better. We need to find ways of pulling on those emotional heartstrings and getting people to take action through emotion. That's where the marketeer and the comms person has a role to play. If we don't have them as the arbiters, if you like, and the sort of the rulers, if you like, of the final version that goes out, I think we're missing an opportunity. So that's probably the bit that struck me. But the bit that didn't strike me was the overarching sort of slap in your face statistic, which I think is the thing that next year is going to be fascinating to review and see what's changed, is that 38% of all organizations have rolled back on their sustainability communications in the last 12 months. Greenhushing in the clearest form.
Massively, and that just has huge implications. I'm going to read you some other stats here, and we'll get your comment on them. So, the big headline one, as well as that 38%, was that 2/3 of professionals are now more worried about greenwashing than they were a year ago. And that just shows the importance, and that probably, completely links with that 38% that are just doing less.
More fear, less sense of needing to take or wanting to take action as a result. Silent sustainability has become it was something we talked about on the panel last night. And I think one of the panelists made a really interesting observation about, there's always space for a pause. It makes sense to at times just take a moment to sort of see where you are and take a step back. But in terms of a chronic quietness, if you like, when it comes to what you're doing in terms of sustainability, that applied to an industry or even to an economy is incredibly problematic because we now don't have the stories that we need to inspire the next innovators, the next partnerships, the next opportunities to learn from in a peer-to-peer context. So the implications of this are enormous. I think sometimes people it can be viewed like comms and marketing. It can be viewed as there's nothing, it's a bit frivolous. Is it really that important? It's essential. We have to drive change quickly. The only way we drive change quickly is we share ideas quickly and with trust and with credibility. And that's why these statistics are so important.
Putting your marketing hat back on, I wonder if we see some amazing marketing and messaging from the startup community. Those innovators, those entrepreneurs. It feels they can move a lot faster. They come out with a lot clearer information than maybe the big organisations that are sort of wrapped up in approval and slow, and that side of thing. I'd just love to get your opinion on that.
It's the oil tanker, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the oil tanker when it comes to sort of making change. I think when you're a startup as well, there's almost this sense of, you haven't got any skeletons in your closet, have you? So, you've literally got a blank sheet of paper and you've got an opportunity to set the course, if you like. And that allows you to be way more confident, I think. And you're not big enough to have the kind of scrutiny that a larger company is going to have on you. So you totally buy into the human reasoning behind why it's scary to do this stuff.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
Yeah.
But I think, and this would be one of my kind of core messages for this, I think regardless of the size of organization, like you could be a one-man band, you could be a multinational PLC, there is a very simple approach that was actually borne out in Marlin Cunningham from Hattrick that you mentioned's presentation last night, where she spoke about, and I always forget the name of the opticians.
Yeah.
What are they called? I can't remember. That Able something? No, maybe I've got that wrong. Anyway, they just, in my mind, provided the absolute simple blueprint that any organization can follow in order to approach their sustainability communications confidently, which is a lot of what came out in this research as well. And that is to perhaps pause and then think about implementing a radically transparent, proactive disclosure of exactly where you are as an organization, with all the warts and all the difficulties perhaps considered and presented and acknowledged. And we actually, in our green claims policies now that I mentioned to you before, the first section of a green claims policy is literally titled Where We Can Improve. And it's an opportunity for our signatories to go, do you know what, before I even get into the claims that I have substantiated, the language that I use, my editorial process, the way that I approach team training, I'm just going to acknowledge where we're not sustainable as an organization. And what that does is that liberates the brand to be able to speak confidently about the things that you are doing well. And it disarms anyone that's going to come to you and go, great, we've seen your content over here that says that, product X and Y is sustainable, and that's fantastic. But what about X and, Y and Z? Well, guys, we've acknowledged that. And if you look at our green claims policy, you can literally read our own words, our own reflections on where we could get better.
I think key is almost humanizing that journey. I think I think the term roadmap needs a rebrand, because every time I see a roadmap, I'm like, I switch off. But do you know what? An honest overview of the journey you've been on, and owning those mistakes, and that very straightforward comms is what's needed.
And the thing is, I come back to your point about large organizations. Like, I just think, how refreshing would it be for, and again, I know there's risk associated with this, but then again, is there risk associated with this? Because ultimately trust is that business, that value within a business, which is so fundamental for your long-term, for the long-term prospects of a company. If your trust is dwindling or if your trust is increasing, like, you can literally, almost everything else can sort of fall alongside that. Because if you don't have trust, and if trust is broken with your stakeholders, things are going to rapidly change in your organization. So with that in mind, for me, I look at big organizations, I think, how refreshing would it be for a large organization to say, no, do you know what? We are just going to accept and acknowledge our history. We're going to accept and acknowledge what we've been. And then we're going to be really clear and intentional about the direction that we're heading in. It's almost like, I don't like making this all seem really oversimplified in terms of analogies, but it's almost like somebody going to counseling. It is. It's like, it's somebody who's like gone through their entire life, let's say as a larger organization, and they've got some bad habits, and, maybe they've, not behaved particularly well at times, and they go and see a counselor, and they're really nervous about the prospect of seeing cancer. Oh, this feels uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about stuff. There's a lot of pain associated with the experience that I've had before. But then they sit down with the counsellor and they start opening up and they start sharing. And suddenly they're honest with the counsellor, and they're able to then be honest with themselves and honest with the people around them. And that liberates and that allows them to take on this new journey and stage in their lives. So, sorry, shout out to taking your mental health seriously. But no, I think that analogy is interesting.
We did something really quite fun, or ACAN did, about I think it's 3 or 4 years ago, and they built a confession booth at Futurebuild.
Nice.
And it was inviting people to come on and give their carbon confessions.
Yeah, nice.
You know, maybe we should have a sort of a greenwash confession or greenhush confession booth. Not submit it anonymously.
Yeah,
it's a safe space.
It's a totally safe space, you know. But I think the more, like, I speak to people on our show, on our podcast, and let's just cut the crap. You know, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on here, but you know, let's just get out of the BS cycle. And the best way that we can do that, imagine a world. I was actually, I think I reflect on this with you at Futurebuild, and I said, like, just imagine if you were walking around Futurebuild here and you were looking at all the stands and imagine if you could just implicitly trust everything that you read. Imagine what that would do to the way that decisions would have been made and the way that we would have engaged with one another. The fact that we've got this degree of wariness of one another and what we're saying and what we're presenting, like, we've got to focus on coming back to a point of trusting one another. Yeah. And this, I think, proactive disclosure is the means of that.
I agree. And, you know, over my time, a lot of our partners have asked me, how can we, score each exhibitor? It's not something we've gone through, but I think I'm going to pull a stat out from the research, which was that 86% of built environment professionals support mandatory product lifestyle assessments. And I think that's a cry to sort of show some standardization, some sort of certification or platform that it can measure people on, I think. We have got to find a way of being able to compare apples with apples, and ultimately we're in this, like, initiative certification mishmash, if you like, within the built environment sector, but equally in most other sectors. And it is about cutting through the noise and finding those things that can very, very simply and clearly convey what they mean and what they represent. And I think that's an education piece, but it's also about, we haven't touched on it at all yet, but you look at the regulatory landscape when it comes to sustainability communications and the impact of the Green Claims Directive and what's going on in Europe with are we, aren't we, etc. I think even if you just take all of that to one side, which is in many ways depressing as somebody who's working in the space, that even we're having this debate around something which so evidently is a brilliant piece of regulation and something that from our perspective is going to raise and improve standards and produce some of that standardization that you've just referred to. But the principles that are within the Green Claims Directive, around certifications and labeling and standardization of language, etc., is definitely the route that we're heading in. And that's brilliant to see that people have backed that and said, well, we want that. Yeah. And I think clear last night on the panel as well that EPDs, are now, mandatory, or becoming that way. People want to them. Tina, I think, spoke a lot about, losing specification if they don't have those in place.
It's fascinating. I think the degree to which you are able to present the fact that you are a responsible communicator, which obviously EPDs is one of those things that you can do to say, look, we're responsible enough that we get things verified by third parties. It's the same with the charter. Like, not to do a horrific plug or anything here, but we've had feedback from signatories who've literally said, we go into tender frameworks now and submit the fact that we're part of the charter and what it means and what we've committed to doing from a governance perspective, and it's literally picked up on as that's a point of difference. Integrity between partners that we work with and who we choose to align ourselves with is absolutely essential because of the optics it then gives us as the organization procuring. So from that point of view, I think there's a lot of opportunity to present yourself responsibly in this space.
I'll have a stat, and so let me hit you with another one that maybe backs up that from the research as well. So the research found that 52% of specifiers have switched or considered switching suppliers due to unclear sustainability claims.
I mean, to be fair, like, I think what's fascinating with a stat like that, where obviously you mentioned doing this as a pulse survey now, and obviously this was year one, so it's fascinating, like, benchmarking. But I would love it's going to be really interesting to pick these stats out next year and see what the change is, because I kind of look at that as probably one of those stats that I was like, yeah, that's kind of as I'd expect it to be.
Hope it was that.
Or I hope it would be, yeah. If it was any less than the majority, I'd be like, oh my God, what's going on here? But I would expect to see that increase further next year.
I agree.
think the room for unsubstantiated claims and unclear, ambiguous claims, like that is dramatically falling by the wayside. Like you just can't get away with it now. And obviously that's played out in the fact that a lot of people are shutting up and not actually communicating. But if we can get people communicating again by following these clear practices and structures, then I'm hoping that, that figure will increase too by this time next year.
What I think interesting is that, I would say greenwashing was rife in the sort of, 2015, 16s, around that sort of, zero carbon homes bill and and co-sustainable homes and all that was coming out. It was almost sort of the green gold rush. Back then, government incentives were pushing that as well. Companies were aligning with that. Then we sort of saw this sort of anti using the word sustainability or eco, but now we're seeing that back. Every comms I read now, especially from manufacturers, an eco range or sustainability is used there. We as a brand are talking now going beyond sustainability. We're looking at regenerative. You're looking at circularity. There's you can be cradle to cradle certified. There's all of that side of things. So I think the messaging now is so important, and I think we're going to see a resurgence, sadly, of greenwashing. But as you said there, the survey also found more and more greenhushing. People don't know where to start.
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation. I mean, obviously, like, what do we want? Do we want to have an environment which is such that everyone's so terrified to communicate for fear of being found to be greenwashing that nobody says anything? Or do we want an environment in which essentially there are those that implement clearly best practice and therefore have almost earned the right to communicate about their sustainability credentials and therefore win? Because actually, there is clear evidence that being able to present the sustainability credentials of your business in whatever sector will lead to a greater return. Well, that's then going to incentivize those that perhaps have been quiet, but that haven't shown due diligence to the way that they go about communicating, to start communicating again, which might mean that we then get some more greenwashing, as you've alluded to. So I hadn't thought it through in those terms. But again, I think that's where some of the work that we're doing, we're a small initiative at this stage, and we're not wildly known or worldly known, if you like. But the intention would be to get to that point so that you as a consumer or you as a procurement officer or a CFO was looking at who you were buying from. And one of the criteria was, how do we know that organization is a responsible communicator? And the Anti-Greenwash Charter signatory status is certainly an indicator of that. There are others, but that, I think, is what we're going to need to see develop and grow, that will then facilitate the very best standards of comms moving forward and less greenwashing. Yeah.
You've touched on sort of training. Another stat from the research was that 18% of professionals feel very confident, or only 18% of professionals feel very confident in spotting greenwashing, and 44% say that training gaps stops them from speaking up more as well. And I think that's, how do we embed this, this into our organisations? I know you work very closely with the Carbon Literacy Project as well, Hattrick. Offer training on that as well, to embed that into their organisations.
I think there's a cultural element there as well. Like you definitely want to create an organisational scenario whereby everybody's informed enough in order to whether or not you're on the front line or in the the strategic team in HQ or whatever, like everybody's got a collective awareness so that you're able to sort of police things as a collective. So I think that's absolutely crucial. But coming back to your point, you mentioned the Carbon Literacy Project, like they do some great work on this. I think there's some fundamental training around comms and marketing in relation to this that I think is something that the guys at Hattrick have put together as a course, which I think is really good. There are others out there, but I think I come back to my point about the 5% of marketers being involved in the final decision making in terms of the comms that are produced, sustainability comms that are produced. For me, it's we need to train the creatives and the salespeople, because again, they're the ones that are on the front line talking. Those are the people that we need to get really upskilled in an understanding of sustainability and understanding of greenwashing and how to craft their campaigns in a responsible way. And that's crucially what the foundation of the work that we do.
Yeah. Another, I think, interesting point was maybe the difference in perceptions between the different age and different generations as well. You know, we talk a lot about the sort of, you know, the Gen Zs now extremely environmentally conscious in their thinking, maybe the older generation not so. I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah. I think there was a panel question, wasn't there, that was thrown in that suggests that wasn't true. But no, go on.
But also, you know, I think now we're seeing this level of scrutiny or this need for sustainability practice at board level now as well. But yeah, I just wonder if you've got any tips of sort of how do you bring on board an organisation that does span, you know, those different age groups, those different, you know, genres.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. I think the one of the things in that research that, again, to me, that there was a two-sided element really in the research regarding Gen Z. There was the hope, which is, I think, and I can't remember the stat, but essentially that, you know, Gen Z do view the built environment as having the potential to really affect change in a positive way.
Yeah, 2/3 of them.
2/3 of them, and I think that compares quite significantly to the over 45s who are way more,
just 18%.
18% thought that, you know, which I think, again, that's a stark difference in terms of hopefulness, essentially, around what can be done. So that's a really big tick. But I do think that the BS barometers of the Gen Zers are so sensitive, and they've grown up in many ways in only ever knowing the digital age, and therefore the amount of content that they've engaged with, the amount of sort of skills that they've developed in terms of how they scrutinize sources and how they scrutinize language and how they scrutinize substantiation. It's just baked into them naturally to know what to look for and to know how to operate. So I think what it's doing, and especially when I think Marlon mentioned the stat last night that we've now tipped over to there being more Gen Z employees in our workforce than boomers. Well, that's a major moment. And I think in light of what we're talking about today, that means that there is now really going to be no hiding place when it comes to responsible comms, because the majority of people in the workplace that are going to be engaging with comms are very naturally able to dissect and to review in a really kind of sensitive way.
I think the way that Gen Z call out things as well is very different. They're very public in that. You know, it's not a sort of, I'm going to have a quiet conversation with someone. It will be, I'll create a vlog on that. I'll light up social on that.
Which again is that classic thing that borne out in this. You either lean in with, dare I say it, and I know talking about using this term in the context of like corporate behavior is just, for a lot of people, it's just turn the other head, if you like, turn the other cheek. But it's vulnerability. You know, it's understanding that, like no organization out there is truly sustainable. That's the first thing to say. You have those that are better, those that aren't, those that are stronger in other areas, those that are weaker in other areas. As soon as you get out of your own way and you accept that and you present that and you engage in dialogue, you will be respected ultimately by the Gen Zers, but equally other generations, by everyone really, for your position. So I think the time is coming basically where, you know, those that adapt and take this approach now are going to win significantly. And then within 5 to 10 years, perhaps it's just going to be the absolute norm and expectation that organizations behave in this way.
Yeah. So I'm going to put you in the sort of space of, you know, you're one of the listeners, you know, they're a marketing person, they're within their organization, suddenly being tasked to communicate our brand new ESG policy or, you know, this brand new product that's, you know, got these amazing sustainability credentials. Yeah. It's a bit scary. Where do I start? What's some practical tips maybe of how I go about that? You know, what's the sort of, you know, what does good, credible sustainability communication look like? What's the sort of non-negotiables?
So it's a great question. So I think the first thing you do as a marketeer is you go back to the sustainability or ESG team, basically where the data, the substantiation for whatever the claims are that have been put forward. You go back to them and you dive into the detail, and you allow yourself to get a full understanding and appreciation of exactly what you're being asked to essentially sell. And once you've got that degree of clarity around the substantiation, that's the key and core first step. The second step that we would always suggest that needs to be factored into is your use of language. So you've substantiated the claims, you know that you've got evidence for those claims. Next, we need to look at language. And language is determined by firstly looking at regulation that's relevant to you. So in the UK, you'd look at the Green Claims Code, for example, that I alluded to before. And you are just making sure that you are following best practice in terms of your use of language and not falling foul of that. The third element of good sustainability comms, which is the most tricky, but comes back to what we talked about at the beginning in terms of the most problematic form of greenwashing, is context. And really thinking and understanding the context within which you're producing this content. So you might well have ticked all the boxes in terms of we've got evidence for all of the 7 claims that we're making about this particular product that you've alluded to in our documentation. It's all been verified by third parties. We have EPDs coming out of our work. We've got FCA approval over here. We've got this, that, and the other. Fantastic. We've also then checked all the content against relevant regulation, and we ticked all the boxes. We've got no problems with it. It's all perfectly aligned. That third element is the crucial one. Have you fully considered, when you look at this content that you're producing, whether or not this could be construed as misleading by not providing a clear contextual picture of how this content lands compared to the rest of the operation of the organization? And that's a serious skill. That's something that only really you can develop through training, I think, and experience. So again, coming back to our point about training, if you're a junior marketeer and you're joining an organization and they're handing you over a load of sustainability comms for you to produce about new products X, Y, and Z, if you haven't been trained on how to go about scrutinizing or considering the broader context within which the organization operates, you need to ask for that before you do anything else.
Well, this is the perfect point to bring in the Anti-Greenwash Charter. I'd love you to go through the sort of services you offer. How do people get involved in that? How can we find out more information?
Sure. And thank you for laying me up so lovely, Martin. I alluded to our process earlier. But the first stage in terms of onboarding new signatories is that we do a suitability assessment. So you can imagine one of the worst things that could happen to the Anti-Greenwash Charter is that we had organisations that were looking to join us for greenwashing purposes. And we have had organisations that have attempted to do so. And, I don't want to throw sort of shade, if you like, on B Corp. They're doing absolutely fantastic. And a lot of what they're experiencing at the moment is just simply growing pains, I think, with the initiative. And we actually do work with a number of B Corps and have advisors sitting on our boards that are aligned with them as well. So I'm really, really big fan of them. But I think you can see some of the issues that they've had in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years have really been born out of organizations wanting to get involved in something that makes them look great, but they're doing so because they ultimately have some skeletons in the closet that they're trying to cover up. So for us, we want to make sure that we have good actors that are joining the charter. So that's our first step. Once we've done that, we then conduct our training, we conduct our static content reviews, and we conduct or produce a green claims policy. And that then kicks into play the license period when the organization can be recognized as a signatory of the charter, and they can do all the promotional work around that we help and support them with. And as I say, they're then reviewed periodically to make sure that they're in line with the charter standards and their own green claims policy. And what we do, the reports that we produce, the campaign review reports, those are then appended to the green claims policy of the signatory. So again, in full transparency, you can then go and read all of the previous reports and to see the timeline of events of them proving that they are aligned with their own policy and the standards of the charter. So again, absolute transparency in terms of our judgment, how we produced it. That's fundamental to I think, building something like the charter.
Brilliant. And then for full transparency, there's obviously a cost involved. How is that? Is that on size of organisation? Is that on amount of product? How does that work?
So it's a great question. So the first thing to say is that we're a not-for-profit. Again, obviously really important, I think, to look at the wider impact of what we're trying to do, and ultimately we're operating in that way. So in terms of the fee structure, so we have a means-tested, revenue-banded license fee that covers those campaign reviews that I've alluded to. That's all on our website. Anyone can go and check that out there. And then the other costs that are associated with it that are bespoke and tailored are the training. And that's obviously dependent upon the number of teams and where they're located. We have a number of signatories who are multinationals who have got teams all over the world that we're training. So obviously we have to factor that in. And then there is obviously a bespoke cost associated with the static content reviews as well, depending upon your size of website, the number of websites you've got, brochure materials, etc., etc.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I would urge everyone to check out your website. Also, if you're unsure, go and speak to some of the signatories. You're very transparent on that. You can talk to them about the process they've gone through. We're also in the bio of this podcast going to put a link to the research. So download the research we've done. So we're looking now forward. 12 months time, we're going to do the research. It's going to come out again, which is great. But I'd love to what does the next 12 months look like for the charter?
It's a great question. So we are, and again, it's the timing of this show is sort of titillating. If I don't know, maybe that's a too strong a word. We've got a number of very big sort of pivotal points, if you like, in the charter development that essentially just involve the size and scale of organisation that are now looking to commit to doing this piece of work with us is shifting significantly. And I'm super excited because when it comes to them predicting what might happen over the course of the next 12 months, it's really difficult because these could be sort of fundamental overnight shifts in the way that not just the built environment industry, but actually a number of other industries fundamentally view a green claims policy, for example, and the important role that plays in sort of upholding best practice. So that's a very political answer you've got from me, with me sitting hugely on the fence, but it's a very exciting time for what we're doing. I think the regulatory landscape that we now find ourselves in, the degree of confusion, if you like, about where are things going to sit, makes things like our voluntary initiative, which is unique. There is no other ESG related initiative that focuses exclusively on communications. That therefore positions us in a really healthy place, and hopefully we can have a significant impact over the next 12 months.
Watch this space on that one then. We always finish the podcast with a question around sort of those individuals that have sort of had a real positive impact, in your life or professionally. And actually, I'm going to give you another plug. Charlie, you do an amazing podcast yourself, and you've had some really quite inspirational people on that. I mean, let's give your podcast a plug, but also, maybe some of the people you've had on have been the people that have had a great impact. But talk about some of that.
Well, Martin, that's really kind of you to bring it up. I mean, I don't know if you found this. I mean, you're a very good host, so I imagine that you didn't find this. But I think there have definitely been some people that I've had on where I've just been an absolute fanboy. And I've actually forgotten what I'm supposed to be there for. I've been sitting there. John Elkington is a great example. So, the godfather of triple bottom line and obviously the fantastic work that he's done throughout his whole career. I'll be honest with you, I just got onto this podcast and just let him take over, and I forgot to ask questions, and he just carried on, and it was a brilliant name and a brilliant person to interview, but I just did it terribly. So apologies, John, if you're happy to be listening in. One of the things that has absolutely astonished me with the work that we've done over the last few years has been the number of people, very senior people, that have been prepared to give up their time to support what we're doing at the Charter. And I want to use your question to give a particular shout out to our advisory council, who are made up of, senior heads of corporate affairs, heads of ESG sustainability for huge companies here in the UK and around the world, heads of ESG, as I mentioned, marketing, comms, etc. Some of them were at the panel discussion last night, Pauline and Karen and Harriet and Veronica. I won't name all of them, but that group have been, to me personally, just an absolutely amazing inspiration and support. I think when you're starting things, as you well know, Martin, like, to get that early stage support from people that you respect, that say there's something here that's important and something I'm prepared to give my time to support you in developing, that gets you a hell of a long way. And it gets you a long way when some of the other sort of metrics aren't maybe working out quite as you'd hope they would. You know, it's hard work getting people to sign the Anti-Greenwash Charter. I'm not gonna be around the bush. It's a difficult thing to get people over the line to do, because it's a scary thing, I think, at times to do. But to have the support of the council has been absolutely huge for keeping us going.
Brilliant. And you know, we're honoured to support, and a big fan of what you do. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.